Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and fitness, where we learn how to overcome adversity, predict fact versus fiction, and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Guys, if you are enjoying those quick tip episodes, please do not forget, reach out, Health Fitness Redefined Podcast at gmail.com. Again, that is Health Fitness Redefined Podcast at gmail.com. Happy to do any topics the audience may or may not like to listen to or learn something new about, but they are fun, quick, 10, 15-minute episodes, straight to the point, and I am thoroughly enjoy doing them. Without further ado, today's show, we're going to talk about something that's important for a lot of people, especially as you age, that is osteopenia / osteoporosis. So bone density, basically, as you get older, your bones just slowly start crippling and decaying. That's a horrible way to put it. So we're going to bring this all in, and we have a great guest today. We have Dr. Neustadt. Dr. Neustadt, John, it's a pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great topic. I'm really happy to be talking about it with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think we're going to have a lot of energy this episode. I feel it, and it's a good day. So without further ado, let's just find out a little more about you. And I know you said you're an naturopathic doctor. So what got you into that realm?
Well, I was interested in integrative medicine even before going back to medical school. I was living in the Northwest in the Seattle area, and one of my degrees, my background is in botany, where I focused on the cellular and molecular biology of plants, and ethnobotany, which is how people use plants in commerce and medicine and industry. And I understood that nutrition as a foundation of health was very important. So I was looking for that when I was going back to medical school in a program. And the only program that had both nutritional medicine and botanical medicine and an integrative approach from the very beginning and all the way through, including conventional pharmacology and radiology and embryology and all the, the conventional courses as well. The only thing that integrated all of that in my interests was naturopathic medicine. Fortunately, I was in Seattle, and one of the premier naturopathic medical schools is in the area, Bastyr University. So I applied, they accepted me, and here I am, 20 years later, having specialized in one of the areas is in bone health and osteoporosis, because when I was in clinical practice, I was treating some patients with osteoporosis, and I thought I was doing a great job. Their bone density was going up. My mother-in-law has osteoporosis, and I was helping her. I was not her primary care doc. She was working with her primary care physician, a medical doctor. She was on Fosamax, one of the most popular medications for osteoporosis, and her bone density was going up. And so she was happy. Her physician was happy. I was happy. And then she tripped and broke her hip. And I thought to myself, what is going on here? What is wrong with this picture? And I started diving into the research and realized that, yes, conventionally, most doctors and most patients are only focusing on that number on the test, that bone density test number. But the most dangerous things with osteoporosis is if you break a bone. If you have osteoporosis and fracture a hip, there's up to a 36% chance that you're going to be dead within a year. And half of those people who survive never recover their full pre-fracture level of mobility and pain-free life that they had. But the problem is that the bone density test only predicts 44% of women with osteoporosis who will break a bone and only 21% of men. And so fracture risk depends on factors largely other than bone density. And that bone density test is only one piece of a larger puzzle that must be addressed if we're going to help patients as well as we can.
Yeah, I think it's a good topic to talk about because a lot of people suffer with osteopenia, osteoporosis. For those that may not know, just listening, osteopenia is just pre to osteoporosis, the beginning where your bones start getting more brittle. But I want to talk about just some specific numbers, kind of get an idea of where we're at. What's the average age someone will start experiencing osteopenia, osteoporosis?
So we don't know what the average age is. What we do know is it is primarily a condition that affects women. 80% of cases are in women, and primarily postmenopausal women. So we're looking at women after menopause, going through menopause. Then the 10 years after menopause is the fastest rate of bone loss. But there are a lot of other things that cause osteoporosis, and people should be aware of it because they could be at risk and not know about it. Many medications damage bone and increase osteoporosis risk and fracture risk. One of the most common medications that's not recognized often conventionally are antidepressant medications. A lot of women are taking SSRI or any medications that increase serotonin like Prozac, damage bone, increase fracture risk, and people aren't aware of it, and the doctors aren't talking to their patients about it because they are largely ignorant of that fact as well. Proton pump inhibitors, acid blockers also increase fracture risk by up to 60% after 4 years of taking them. And that's been known since 2010. That's not new information. Currently there are 53 million people with osteoporosis or osteopenia in the United States, about 200 million people around the world. Every 30 seconds, someone around the world breaks a bone due to osteoporosis. But globally and in the US, the population is aging. There are more people 65 years and older now than there are younger than 5. And so we are looking at really a tsunami of new cases as the population is aging over the next decade and 10 and 20 years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's pretty crazy watching the shift. People are living longer and starting to experiencing more things that age causes, as for example, osteopenia, osteoporosis. And we've entered an age, and this is something we've talked about a lot on this show, where people are just relying more and more on Western medicine. It's a pill for everything. And I think that's a big thing we have to be aware of. Yeah, it's a good thing to a certain extent. Like if you need a quick anti-inflammatory, take some ibuprofen, just as a basic example. But we have to be aware that medication and supplements do have side effects. So
There are great cases for why people should take an osteoporosis medication. There's good research on them, but it's not for everyone. And one of the challenges is most of the doctors don't recognize or don't understand, because there is no board certification in osteoporosis, don't understand the data on the medications. They're prescribing based on protocols that are provided by medical societies or medical organizations without really understanding the data. For example, if you have osteoporosis, but you've never broken a bone with the disease before, then what we're trying to do is called primary fracture prevention. Primary prevention. You've never had a fracture before. None of the oral bisphosphonate medications, that's Fosamax, Actonel, or any of the other medications, have been shown to prevent both a primary vertebral fracture and a hip fracture. So some medications are better at preventing fractures of the spine, but they don't prevent hip fractures, which are the most dangerous fractures. The only medication that's been shown to prevent both, if you've never had a fracture, is Zometa. And so people are primarily being prescribed these oral bisphosphonates, Fosamax, Actonel, thinking, again, they're protected, but it actually doesn't reduce their hip fracture risk in terms of what the studies and the research show. If you've already had a fracture, then we're trying to do secondary fracture prevention. And in that situation, there are more medications that have been shown to be effective at preventing both vertebral and non-vertebral fractures. And the reality is, it's not this one-way street of decay where you reach peak bone health and bone density in your 20s, and then steadily it starts to decline, and it's this fatalistic one-way street where there's nothing you can do. The research is very clear. Through an integrative approach, you can actually improve your bone health, improve your bone density, maintain your bone strength, and protect yourself. And that's the entire emphasis of the book I wrote, to help patients understand what they can do, what questions to ask their doctors, and holistically in all these different areas: diet, lifestyle, dietary supplements, medications, looking at medications that may increase their fractures, what patients can do, what people can do to take charge of their own health and create holistic plans for themselves.
I think the best way to do this is to kind of we went through a lot really quickly. So I just want to backtrack a little bit and
Sure.
start with what's the typical approach that somebody would go through once, like, how do they get diagnosed? Let's start simple. How would
Great
someone go ahead
question.
and you mentioned bone density. That's the stereotypical model, but you're
Yep.
saying it doesn't pick up whether or not somebody's going to determine a fracture. So what are there alternative ways, and how would somebody know whether it's worth to get checked for osteoporosis in the first place?
Great question. Unfortunately, most patients don't know they have it until they break a bone, and then they end up getting a bone density test. Despite the limitations of the bone density test, a DEXA scan, which is an X-ray, people should get tested. It is the gold standard. It's the best we've got at the moment, and it is the diagnostic criteria for being diagnosed with osteoporosis. The screening recommendations by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force for Osteoporosis is women 65 years or older, or postmenopausal women younger than that. They don't recommend men routinely get screened, and I believe their recommendation is maybe men over 70. But one study showed that 95% of Medicare patients, eligible patients who are by definition eligible for screening, aren't getting tested with a bone density test, aren't getting screened. So most people are not getting screened. The Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, I like their recommendations better because it's a little more nuanced. And that is, if you're 50 years or older, man or woman, and you break a bone, you should get a bone density test, because there may be bone loss and your bones may be getting progressively weaker without knowing it, because it's typically asymptomatic. There are no symptoms. Suddenly you're walking along, or you trip and fall and you break a bone.
Yeah, it could be the lightest fall. I know we all see that with.
Similarly, people on certain medications, women with a breast cancer diagnosis who are taking aromatase inhibitors, the recommendations are that they get a baseline screened, or men who are on androgen deprivation therapy, they should get screened as well. So there are some nuances there, but in general, those are the recommendations.
Awesome. So the next question would be, before we get into what to do once diagnosed, let's start with pre. So somebody my age, 30s, 40s, whatever, they don't have osteopenia, osteoporosis. It's something they've heard about or they don't really pay attention to. And they're like, well, why the hell do I care? So what are some ways somebody like me could help make sure that I don't eventually end up with it or prolong it as long as possible?
Great question. Fortunately, the same activities are going to help not only your bones, but reduce your risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and essentially all chronic degenerative diseases. And that is following a healthy diet, first and foremost, as a foundation. The Mediterranean dietary pattern has been associated with a 20% reduction in osteoporosis risk. And that's essentially a plant-forward diet, lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, ample amounts of lean protein, minimizing intake of packaged foods and processed foods, making sure you're drinking enough water. Exercise also super important, as you know, incredibly important for maintaining bone density, but also for maintaining balance, maintaining muscle mass. 95% of fractures occur because somebody falls. So anything we can do to improve balance is going to reduce the risk of falling and fall-related injuries, which includes fractures. Another thing that is often overlooked, and I've never heard it talked about when patients have come to me and talked about the conversations they've had with their conventional healthcare providers, is sleep. Not getting enough sleep is associated with reduced bone density, with bone loss. That's a major stress on your body, which raises cortisol, which causes your bones to lose not just calcium and other minerals, but it can damage collagen. And it's in fact that bone collagen that gives bone its ultimate strength. And there are over 180 proteins in bone. It's not just minerals, it's not just calcium. And that bone density test only measures the mineral part of the bone. It doesn't measure any of this other quite important part of bone health, which gives bone its ultimate strength, which is the collagen and the other components that are in bone other than minerals. And through a healthy diet, through maintaining healthy stress levels, getting enough sleep, those approaches will help reduce your risk for osteoporosis. But also, if you have it, it's important to do all those things also.
Yeah, and I think I want to break this down just a little bit more real quick. So sleep is something we devoted about a month ago 45 minutes to, about the importance of sleep as far as consistency, quality, and just making sure that we're getting good overall sleep. It's so important. It's I know I'm drilling this in my audience's head, and they're probably really bored and making them tired. Good, but in a certain sense, like sleep is the foundation to everything. And if you're not sleeping, you're going to have a wide variety of more issues than just this. So I couldn't agree more. Out of everything, sleep to me is number one. The next thing we talked about a little bit briefly is diet. And the Mediterranean diet, if I had to label anything, if I had to say, okay, held a gun to your head, pick a diet, that would be the best one for people to start doing. I prefer just not even using the word and just eat healthy foods. But if we're going to pick, we'll pick the Mediterranean diet, which even shows how important it is to get enough veggies, having all of those micro and macronutrients that are found in just kale, for example. It's more than just the little tiny leaf that you're getting, maybe some vitamin A that people are thinking about. There's so many things found in that it's so important to consume those kind of things for our overall health. And in turn, exercise increasing muscle mass in the body. We did a whole episode on testosterone, which is really important. And I think the underlying reason that men probably experience osteoporosis slightly less than women, because we do have more muscle mass on our bodies because we do naturally produce testosterone. You mentioned quite a few times that postmenopausal women are the highest risk to have osteoporosis, and that has a lot to do with their sex hormones, and it's just going all over. It's just dropping. So it shows the importance of making sure that we're staying healthy and not having high amounts of body fat. We're not walking around with an extra 50, 60 pounds of fat on our body. It's just going to weigh us down, put unnecessary stress. But instead, we have an extra 20, 30 pounds of lean muscle, which is overall going to help the function as we move. And I loved one word you said, and you don't even know how much I love it. And that word was balance. This is why balance is drilled into every single exercise program we work on. And my clients look at me like it's so freaking silly. But in my eyes, I'm saying, especially for my 65 plus population, let's fix all of this and just not have you fall. Like if we can make sure that you don't even fall in the first place, and even better, if we can make sure that, God forbid, you do fall, you know how to catch yourself so you don't break anything. That's a win-win. So when we're doing little things like ankle stabilization, you're helping prevent the issue of dying from osteoporosis, which you're not going to die directly because you have it. But like you said, breaking a hip, having osteoporosis is almost a death sentence for a lot of people. And that is so true. So just getting a good foundation of all of these things, you can help prevent osteoporosis, but also keep you healthy and live a longer, happier life in the first place. So it's just a win-win with all of those.
May I interject on two things you said, and one on
Absolutely.
exercise and one on diet? You and I could not be more aligned on both of these. And with respect to exercise, I just want to have your audience understand that when it comes to the risk for osteoporosis fractures, the most consistent predictor of fracture risk, it's not the bone density test, it's somebody's gait and mobility. how steady they are and stable they are on their feet. So the work that you're doing with people with balance is crucially important and should never be overlooked. In fact, it can't be overemphasized. The other thing with diet, despite the high protein, keto craze, high protein diet that so many people are excited about these days, what I repeatedly find that people aren't consuming enough protein, which you have to have for bone and for muscle. The USRDA for protein is insufficient as people get older to maintain muscle mass, which helps people, of course, maintain their balance and reduce their risk for falling. So what in the diet chapter of my book, Fracture Proof Your Bones, I give the recommendation based on the clinical trials that you really do need about 1.2, 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. And that's the minimum to maintain and build muscle mass as you age. So for me, that's about 94 grams of protein. I'm 150 pounds. So you really need to, I think, check in with yourself, if you have a resource that can help you with diet, read the chapter in the book or read some other resource where you can figure out what your needs are. Because if you're not getting enough of those micronutrients, as you mentioned, if you're not eating healthy, if you're not fueling your body well, if you're not getting enough protein, despite how good your exercise routine may be and how good your balance routine may be, you're going to plateau. And in fact, if you're deficient in certain amino acids, you're actually not going to be building muscle. And you may progressively start to become weaker despite how much you're working out. So sleep, exercise, diet, they're all intimately connected. You have to have them all to function as optimally as you can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that. It's a bunch of stuff, like especially just making sure we have enough of our essential amino acids, that those are the ones we're not producing. So if you're on a plant-based diet and you have a lot of, which is great for so many things, you need to make sure you're getting enough of your amino acid profile, because only a complete amino acid profile is found in animal products. So just something to keep in mind. And I can't tell you, just a funny example, I think this is the best way to kind of leave this before we move on, is bodybuilders. And I know this is the exact opposite extreme, but I just want to give an example for protein intake. They eat about it's 2 grams per pound that they weigh.
Wow.
So think about that. That's a
That's
lot.
incredible. That's amazing. Yeah.
We have one who's a professional bodybuilder that trains with us, and he eats 300 grams of protein a day. You know how many people are getting that? That's
People
obscene,
don't
and
need
that's on another level.
unless you're training. That's on the extreme, but most people aren't even
Agreed.
getting minimum to maintain the basic level of health.
Agreed. The RDA, the recommended daily allowance that's put out, is abysmal. It is way too
It's
low. A
too low.
1-to-1 is kind of where you want it to be, or like what you said, using the kilogram reference. But it's too low, and we're not eating enough. And I think breakfast is the case in point for most people. How many people eat protein for breakfast? Or if they do, they have 1 egg.
I recommend people have protein with every meal and every snack.
Absolutely. We're going to grab a quick break from our sponsor, guys, and we'll be right back. And we're going to talk about things to do after you are already diagnosed. So stay tuned, and we will be right. Did you know at Redefine Fitness, we not only have 1, but 2 different types of nutrition programs to help get you started? You hear me say all the time the downsides of the keto diet and this one and this diet and insert horrible thing for you over here. Instead, here at Redefine Fitness, we want to teach you how to eat. The most important thing, as I repeated time and time again, is creating habits. That's right. In our program, we're going to create healthy habits for you, eating the foods that you love to eat. And 90% of the time, you're going to end up eating more food. And yes, still lose weight, still get the results at the gym. That is the best part about this program. There's no special drinks, foods, blends I'm sending your way. It's just the foods you have in your kitchen, and we're going to work with you to get you on track for the rest of your life. And this isn't restrictive, so don't think there's no more
alcohol for the rest of your life if you like drinking it. There's gonna be programs in place for you. We have our basic program, which we check in with you once a month, and we're gonna set everything for that month for you to track through our awesome app, guys. That's right, we have our own app. You can scan barcodes on there. You can track your macros on there. We're gonna, if you'd like to, track progress photos on there. Then we have our advanced program, which includes the basic plus weekly check-ins and 24/7 access to your coach. You're at a restaurant and you're reading a menu and you don't know what to eat, send a picture to your coach. We're going to sit there and help you. You want more info? Call us at 631-364-9027 or shoot us an email at staff, S-T-A-F-F, at redefine-fitness.com. Again, that's staff at redefine-fitness.com. Now back to the show.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. We are talking to John here all about osteoporosis. So we're going to get into the main question. We talked about what to do pre-diagnosis, how to prevent getting there in the first place. So let's say you found out you broke a bone, you found out you have osteoporosis or osteopenia. What are some foundations that you should work on? Or is it still the same thing as we talked about previously, which is sleep, diet, exercise? Or is there anything else you should add on?
So it is all the same things, but there are some additional things that you should consider doing. One is supplementation. So if you are diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, your doctor is likely going to recommend vitamin D and calcium. But that's not the only nutrients. Those aren't the only nutrients that have shown to promote bone health and that are important to look at. Unfortunately, the education for conventionally trained doctors in nutrition is not really there. They don't get nutritional medicine classes. So beyond just saying, oh, calcium and vitamin D, they're not familiar with the clinical trials and the research for other nutrients. So what I like to educate people on is to ask the question, no matter what is being recommended, the question is, has it been shown in clinical trials to maintain strong bones as indicated by reducing fractures? Now, people will say, and a lot of companies will point to, including the FDA approved medications, will point to, oh, it improves bone density. But as I already talked about, bone density doesn't necessarily correlate with reduction in fractures. It's a number on a test. It's called a surrogate marker. Clinically, the most important thing is, have clinical trials shown that X, Y, or Z reduces fractures as the endpoint studied in the volunteers? So when you look at that and you look at nutrients used in dietary supplements, there are only 4 that have been shown to fit that criteria. Calcium and vitamin D have been shown to reduce fractures by about 18 to 23%. I'm a fan of testing vitamin D and making sure you're in an optimal range. For bone health and fracture reduction, that number associated with maximum hip fracture reduction is between 30 and 44 nanograms per milliliter on a blood test. But if you're looking for immune boosting effects and immune supportive effects of vitamin D, the research points to higher levels being better. You're talking about 50 or 60 on the tests. And then when it comes to other nutrients shown to maintain strong bones, there's a specific form of vitamin K2 called MK4. Now, there are a couple types of vitamin K2 that you'll see in dietary supplements out there. One is MK7, the other is MK4. Vitamin K2 is a category. There are different subtypes of vitamin K2, and they're not the same molecules. When you change one carbon atom on a molecule, it changes the name, but it also changes the activity. What the research shows is that MK7 may slow down the loss of bone density, but clinical trials have not shown that it actually increases bone density. But more importantly, there are no studies on MK7 at all showing that it actually maintains strong bones as indicated by reducing fractures in clinical trials. In contrast, MK4 in the amount of 45 milligrams per day, there's over 25 clinical trials on it. Many clinical trials showing that it not only stops the loss of bone density, but promotes healthy bone density, improves bone density. But most importantly, there are at least 5 clinical trials showing that it maintains strong bones as indicated by reducing fractures. In fact, over 70% fracture reduction with the MK4. It's been so well studied that since 1995, it's been approved by the Ministry of Health in Japan for bone health. So that is one crucial nutrient that is really important that people look at and consider taking. When I was in my clinical practice, my first clinic was in Montana. I live in San Diego now. I was working with patients trying to help them. I couldn't find the dose and combination of nutrients shown in clinical trials to work that I needed to help my patients. The dose of MK4 didn't exist, especially combined with calcium and vitamin D. So that's why I created my whole company, to create the solution for my patients. And so that is why the OsteoK minis and OsteoK products that I created are on the market with those clinical doses. And then the fourth nutrient is strontium. Strontium you'll find in dietary supplements, and some dietary supplements marketed for bone health. I'm not a fan of strontium for several reasons. One, all the research on strontium was done on a proprietary form of strontium called strontium ranelate, which was approved as a medication in some European countries. That's not available in the US. As a dietary supplement, the nutrient is typically a strontium citrate. Now, strontium citrate may work, but there are no clinical trials showing that it reduces fractures or increases bone density in clinical trials. Now, let's just assume that it does. What does the research on strontium ranelate show? Because that's all the data that we have. What it shows is that it seems to increase bone density, but the bone density test results are inaccurate. They're false. Because it's a mineral and it's heavier than calcium, it creates false bone density test results. Now, despite the limitation of the bone density test, we want the results to be accurate. More importantly than that, though, the overwhelming amount of data on the clinical trials show that it likely only prevents vertebral fractures, not hip fractures. And then there are some safety concerns. A review of the European regulatory data and clinical trial data were published a few years ago and concluded that for every one patient taking strontium ranelate that's helped by that, meaning it prevents one fracture in one patient, they expect that one patient is going to get a dangerous blood clot that can cause a stroke or a heart attack.
That's not good.
Horrible.
Seriously. Horrible. That's absolutely horrible. I want to simplify everything, so I think it's important for a lot of people to kind of take a step back. Let's start with calcium and vitamin D, because like you said, that's probably the most well known. I think it's really important to note, oh my God, I'm having such a brain fart. Maybe you can help me out. It's manganese and magnesium. I don't remember which one. One of them fights for vitamin D and actually prevents the absorption of calcium. I'm going to put it in the show notes, remember which one it is. But making sure you're having a good balance and knowing that you're getting enough vitamin D in your system, what is the easiest way to do that? I think we can both agree. Get outside. The most easily absorbed vitamin D is vitamin D3. You did mention there's subtypes to every vitamin. You're absolutely correct to saying that. So vitamin D3, getting outside, getting 20 minutes of exposure a day is going to help you so much. And it's so easy. And there's so many things.
But not in the winter. So in the northern hemisphere in the winter, if you're above the sort of a line that cuts from like Santa Cruz east, if you're above that, north of that latitude, the sun doesn't get high enough in the winter to activate those vitamin D receptors that activates the vitamin D, not the receptors, but the UV rays don't get strong enough to initiate that cascade of events starting in the skin that creates vitamin D.
Yeah.
You do need it as a supplement.
So you do need to supplement if you do live in certain parts of the world. I agree. But for, I think, majority of the world, especially if you're in California like yourself, just getting outside 20 minutes. And especially, we talked a lot in a previous episode about sleep, and getting sunlight is important for sleep. It helps set up your circadian rhythm. So even 20 minutes when you first wake up, if you like coffee, have a cup of coffee. I'd rather prefer you to have water or both, but just making sure you're getting outside, seeing some sunlight is just a nice, easy win. Calcium specifically, and I want you to talk about this a little bit more. So calcium citrate is, I think, the most common form of calcium found in multivitamins. I also know it's not the most easily absorbed. So is there recommendations for which type of calcium that someone should take for a look for, or there's certain type of foods that they should look for instead?
So there's a little bit to unpack. Or you said a lot of different things. So I do want to just address a couple things.
Sure.
It's not just about getting outside, but it's exposing your skin to your shirt off. It's not just having your face in the sun. You've got to have a certain percentage of your body exposed directly to the sun without clothing on to get enough vitamin D. And that's why I am a proponent of testing vitamin D levels. So yes, get sunshine. I'm a huge proponent of that, but also know your numbers so that you can know that you're in a healthy range. Because even some people, if they have darker skin, if there's more melanin in their skin, even being out in the sun, they're not going to get as much vitamin D as somebody with lighter skin. I would just say that. With respect to you mentioned calcium and magnesium, and one maybe blocking the other and that sort of thing. I hear all the time people say, well, why isn't there magnesium in your product? And don't you need calcium and magnesium in a specific ratio? For over a decade now, I've been asking people, and I've looked at the medical databases and scoured the research, please send me a citation that shows that. I can find no data that actually shows that to be true. It's this urban legend out there that simply isn't true. And in fact, in the clinical trials that used the 45 milligrams per day and got the over 70% fracture reduction, all they used was, if it wasn't just the MK4, it was calcium and vitamin D with the MK4, no magnesium. Now, I'm a fan of magnesium. I think people should get it primarily in diet, and maybe you need some extra as a multivitamin, and there are reasons why you might need extra. But that whole story of calcium and vitamin D have to be in a certain ratio, have to be together in a product, simply isn't true. Magnesium has never been shown in any clinical trials to reduce fractures. All right, I'll get off my soapbox with magnesium. With respect to calcium citrate, in fact, is one of the better absorbable forms of calcium for the following reasons. One, it doesn't require stomach acid to be absorbed. As we get older, our likelihood that we will start producing less stomach acid increases, meaning most people who get older, they start producing less stomach acid. If you're on an acid blocking medication, of course, you're not producing as much stomach acid. Or if you have other conditions like autoimmune diseases, that increases your risk for less stomach acid as well. The calcium citrate, it disassociates, meaning you've got the calcium part of the molecule of the combination, then you've got the citrate part. They have to separate. No mineral is by itself. It's complexed in products and supplements with something else that carries it into the body, and they have to break apart in order for your body to absorb the mineral. With calcium citrate, it breaks apart at a pH of about 7, which is a basic pH. So it doesn't break apart until your small intestine. So even if you have low stomach acid, you're still going to be able to break it apart. Calcium carbonate, which is the most common form of calcium that's been used in clinical trials, requires stomach acid, a low pH, to be present in order to break it apart and absorb it. With respect to one form of calcium over the other, yes, there's different, what's called bioavailability. That is the ability of your body to absorb the nutrient and use it. But when it comes to outcomes studies, you look at different studies on calcium. All the ones that I've seen have simply looked at bone density. And frankly, it doesn't seem to matter one form or the other when it comes to fractures. You should be getting it primarily from diet to begin with. And most women get about 800 milligrams of calcium in their diet. The average American woman's diet provides about 800 milligrams of calcium. So if you're getting about 400 milligrams of calcium as a dietary supplement, it's going to put you in that healthy RDA range of 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams per day anyway. And I don't really think the form matters that much when it comes to fractures. What I do think is important is when it comes to the tolerability and when it comes to just the ability to use the supplement by absorbing it.
Yeah, a very interesting take on bioavailability when it does comes through. I have personally have never seen research as far as what kind of bioavailability relates to whether it helps prevent bone fractures or not, just to be totally transparent. So I'm just going to take your word for it on all of it. And I think it's important that people do understand there's just a difference, and just to like read when you buy things. Don't just look at something and take it for face value because it says this helps with osteoporosis. Get a general understanding of what something is in it, and don't just go buy that one thing because it's the cheapest or a friend told you about it.
So what I talk about in my book and what I'm passionate about educating people with, and my blogs, on podcasts like yours, when I have the opportunity to talk about it, is what questions to ask. And with osteoporosis, it's very simple. Yes, the disease can be complicated. Yes, the biochemistry can be complicated, but really it boils down to one simple question. And I already mentioned it. Is what I'm looking at, or is what somebody's recommending, has that been shown in clinical trials to reduce fractures? Bottom line, that is as complicated as a consumer needs to get. So if you're looking at a calcium product and they're saying, oh, our calcium is the best, the question is, are there clinical trials, ideally multiple, because you want to have the data replicated, and ideally third party, not paid for by the company, but are there clinical trials showing not just that your product increases bone density, but has it been shown to maintain strong bones, as indicated by the most important thing? Has it been shown to reduce fractures? It's not more complicated than that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think just kind of the last topic to really talk about, which we were talking about a little bit pre-show. I think it's just fun, so I kind of want to mention it. We were talking about whether strength training was probably the most important thing for somebody pre or having already osteoporosis, osteopenia, and I think we talked about it briefly throughout the show, but we're kind of on the same page with it, which is nice to hear. Where the most important thing, and kind of where I come from, is if we could prevent you falling in the first place, that's above everything else. So focusing on functionality, focusing on balance, focusing on those little tendons in your ankle are going to go a long way to help prevent you from falling and reduce the risk of falling in the first place. And then the secondary effect to that is if we can build more muscle and do more strength training. And I just only think it's important to talk about, just because when you start hitting like 70, 75, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, people come in and go, oh, weights aren't for me. And I have to explain to them actually how your age group weights are more important for you than they are for a 20-year-old. And I don't mean weights joining CrossFit and throwing around 400 pounds and deadlifting 600. We're not doing that. I mean weights, slow, steady, controlled. We're focusing on time under tension, really just getting your muscles engaged, putting some damage into them so they have the ability to regrow back bigger, stronger, but not making it so you're limping and can't move. It's to help improve overall quality of life that you do have. And building muscle on someone's body has been shown to help with bone density. So if you can do that in the first place and just focus on more of a functionality approach to it, it's a win-win for everybody.
I agree. I couldn't agree more with you. I would just add two things. One is make sure you're doing it safely. It's
Agreed.
important with somebody with osteoporosis to work with a trainer or a professional who knows how to safely work with people with osteoporosis, because there are some exercises that, when done improperly or when done at all, can actually increase your risk for injury and increase your risk for fractures. So That's important. The other thing outside of the gym in terms of preventing falls is making sure your environment at home is safe. These are conventional recommendations from medical societies as well, how you can fracture proof your home. And that is taking throw rugs out of your home so you don't trip over them, making sure pathways are well lit. So if you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, that you are not tripping over something and you can see, making sure that you have grab bars in your bathroom to steady yourself if you lose your balance, and making sure that furniture isn't jutting out into walkways that you could bump into and trip and fall. So really part of that fall prevention absolutely is exercise and doing it the right way. And part of it is making sure that the environment in which you're living is as safe as possible as it can be for you.
Yeah, I'm going to add in a big one that I see all the time. When you have things plugged in, don't have the cables dragging across the floor,
Oh, that's a good
especially
one. Yeah,
places
that's a
you're going to
good
be
one.
walking at night. That one and dogs. Two biggest reasons that people trip and fall. They have the lights on. Leave a dog and you're getting up and go to the bathroom. I don't care how much the light hurts. If you know the dog's going to be in that area, turn the freaking lights on.
Well, and you don't even have to do it manually. You can get plug-in little lights that are motion activated and come on. So when you get up and start walking, it's just automatically the lights go on and light your pathway up. So there are ways to even make it easier for yourself.
Yeah, I love that recommendation wholeheartedly. And for those that are listening audio, I was nodding my head extremely high up and down as he was talking about work with somebody that knows what they're talking about and really making sure that you don't fall into that straight on cardio trap where that's all you're really doing.
Right.
Because it's not going to increase bone density whatsoever. Newsflash. So
And
having
that's
an understanding and being in a safe environment where, let's say, somebody is just standing, like that's an exercise we do. We're going to sit, we're going to stand. If you are an increased fall risk, you should know as a client that as a trainer, it's our job to know you're at an increased fall risk and to be right up next to you. It is our job to make sure everything you do is safe. We do not want you falling. You do not want to work with people who are going to be having a conversation with a friend and facing the other direction. You want someone next to you. So God forbid you do feel a little imbalanced. We are right there. You are not falling. And I tell my clients that all the time. You will not fall here, period. So it is an important interpretation to make sure you're with in a nice and a safe environment, or go with a friend. If you don't want to do a trainer, go with, you're 70, bring your son with you who's in his 40s and be like, hey, come to the gym with me, and make sure they're next to you and helping you. But that's great. I want to wrap this up. So I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everybody. The first one is, if you were to give us a take-home message about this episode, give us one or two sentences, what would that be?
If you want to learn how you can create a holistic plan for protecting and improving your bone health and reducing your fracture risk, buy my book, Fracture Proof Your Bones, A Comprehensive Guide to Osteoporosis, because I've taken this 20 years of research and the questions that I repeatedly get, and I put it all in there to help patients, because there's no magic bullet here. It's not, oh, just take this one pill or do this one thing. If you want to be proactive, if you want to be educated, if you want to know what questions to ask of your doctor and what you can do, get the book.
And then the second question, kind of you already answered it, but how can people find you, get a hold of you, and find your book?
nbihealth.com is my website, nbihealth.com. Not only is the book available there, as well as on Amazon, but there's tons of free resources, educational resources on their blogs, articles that I've written. The research on the nutrients that I talked about are all on there. I'm a huge fan of transparency. And so everything that I've said here, there are citations for on my website if people want to dig deeper and learn more. I'm a big fan of education, but also the book is on there, and other informational resources and my supplements that I created for my patients are on there as well.
Love it. Thank you for coming on, John. And thank you guys for listening and joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way, and through fitness, you could do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference.